Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our NextGen podcast today. We are here today with a very special guest. We have Linda Pule, who's one of our neurofeedback and behavioral practitioners here in Johannesburg West. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for taking your time. And thank you for all the information that you're going to provide us with. Linda has seen so many kids in her career at Aldeia, and she has so much wonderful experience with children that I thought it's very important that we get her here. So if we can just fall right into it, our topic for today is what is sensory processing? Okay, so Linda, would you mind just giving us a little bit of information, just a little bit of an explanation on what is sensory processing exactly?
Okay. Sensory processing is how the brain takes in and organizes information from senses. We usually think of five senses, which are your smell, your sound, your sight, your taste, and your touch. But we also include proprioception, which is your body awareness. So, for example, this is knowing where your arms are without looking. We also have vestibular, which is your balance and your movement. So most children process sensory input naturally, but for some, the brain misinterprets it, and this can cause stress and confusion.
Okay, so basically what we're saying is that sensory processing is like a filter. All the information that's in your environment goes through a filter and you process it in your brain in order to take it up in the right way. So am I correct in saying that when this filter is broken, or it isn't working properly, then that is when things start to feel too bright, too itchy, or just too much overall?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So um, I know that there's different sensory profiles that you can get in children. I often see sensory processing as almost something that's also on a spectrum. There's such a variety of profiles that you get. Can you maybe take us through those, please?
Okay, so children fall into one of a few sensory profiles. We have sensory seeking, we have sensory avoiders, we have under-responders, and we have mixed. So sensory seeking, these are children that love jumping. They basically crave input. They love jumping, they love spinning, touching, everything. And then we have sensory avoiders. These children get overwhelmed easily. They're very sensitive to crowds, to textures, to different sounds. And then the under-responders, they basically seem slow to reacting. So they may not notice pain or a mess. And then a mixed is basically a combination of all of the above, which is very common. So, yeah.
Okay, so I think what's important to take out from this is that there's so many ways in which your child can react towards input from the environment. And this shouldn't necessarily be seen as behavioral problems. There's sensory responses that affect your child's functioning, and that is very important to know. So I want to stop for a couple of seconds and just focus on how your child's sensory processing shows up in their behavior. Now, the first couple that we're going to look at is often when a child is overstimulated, when they are quite sensory sensitive, or like Linda said earlier, sensory avoiders. Okay, so when a noise is too much, there's too much light, there's too many people, then overstimulation takes place. So everything is too much, and your child's filter can't stay ahead to process all this information in the correct way. Something also like certain clothing textures or socks or shoes that your child doesn't like. These will often lead to meltdowns because it is just too much. Your child's filter cannot take in all that information. The next one is more of a sensory seeking behavior, and that is when your child puts things in their mouth. Okay, so they are seeking oral input. So there might be a certain texture that they like, and you'll see that all things of that kind of texture goes into their mouth. And the other thing is if they are constantly running around. Linda, you spoke about it earlier. And this is definitely sensory seeking behavior. So it is, imagine yourself wanting to eat a chocolate and you crave that chocolate just so bad that you have to have it now. It doesn't matter if it's like 10 o'clock at night and you have to drive to the garage to get it. You want that chocolate right now. That's how your child's body feels in that moment. So I always say, imagine the sensation that you have and put all of that emotion, all of that cravings into a small little human. And just imagine how they're supposed to feel after all your years of experience on this earth. You have at least now, how to handle some of these emotions and how to work through the stimulus in your environment, while these little guys do not. Okay, so sometimes it could appear that they seem defiant in this time because they are going to perhaps go against you and say, but I don't want to be here anymore, or I want to go, I want to leave, I want to go home. And that's when the defiance may come up. We mentioned earlier that meltdowns often appear when a child is overstimulated, but it can also be when they are understimulated, when they are still seeking that stimulation, because it builds on anxiety in their bodies because their body is craving something. Once again, if we take the chocolate story, if you can't get that chocolate or you start feeling hangry, as a lot of people say, then you feel frustrated, you feel angry, you feel anxious. Once again, take that feeling and put it in a little person and imagine by how much it multiplies. Okay, so it's not necessarily them just being difficult. It is literally their brain trying to cope with all this information. Um, Linda, why does it matter? Why does the processing of sensory input in a child matter?
Okay, so when we misinterpret the sensory needs as bad behavior, it can damage their self-esteem as well as the parent-child relationship. So when we recognize the why behind the behavior, we are able to respond with empathy and not punishment. This also supports better learning, confidence, as well as connection. Okay, so think of it as behavior being the tip of the iceberg. So sensory needs are what is underneath.
And then, of course, it's very important to uncover what is underneath. If you can get to the real why, like what's happening in your child, then you can help them regulate. So I would like to suggest for everyone listening or watching the podcast, our very first podcast episode had to do with emotional regulation and how you can help your child with their emotional regulation, and what you can do to lead them in the process. Because oftentimes children that have sensory processing struggles, they often feel blind in this whole journey that they have to go on. So things that you can do at Aldeia, we also believe a lot in prevention, rather than later having to go into intervention, where possible. It's not always possible, but that is what we often try and do. And Ways in which you can then support your child to rather implement some prevention rather than later intervention is what we're going to look at now. So practical ways to help them is to create a calm and predictable routine. Your child is already struggling with the unpredictability of their emotions. You know, it's a very abstract concept to them. They don't know what emotions are. They don't know how to identify them, what to do with them. So creating a calm and predictable routine throughout their everyday will help them to regulate those emotions and just to make a little bit more sense of what's going on. It's going to help them feel more relaxed, and just help them to be able to take a breath. Using something like sensory toys. If you are lucky enough to have a sensory tool like a weighted blanket, then that is fantastic. Absolutely use that for your child, because the pressure will slow down their breathing, slow down their heart rate, and help them to calm down. When a child is often overstimulated, they need help to calm down, because at that time in place, their mind is just swirling around and going in circles, and they can't find this spot where they can actually help themselves calm down. So using something like even a heavier blanket and wrapping them up in that, something like a fidget toy, that they can just take that extra energy that is being formed and channel it into in a more positive way, so that they don't show negative behavior. It is important for caregivers, parents, teachers. Having movement breaks throughout the day is absolutely crucial for a child that struggles with sensory processing. Um, Having them just go outside, you know, and tell them, okay, quickly run there and come back. That in itself is amazing for them to help them regulate. Or telling them, okay, go outside, go kick a ball, and then you come back. Or quickly go onto the jungle gym and then you come back down. Okay, because that's a way of prevention. As a caretaker, teacher, and parent, you often know the kids that's in front of you or your child better than anyone else, and you're able to see when things are getting too much. So as soon as you see it getting too much, you implement the prevention method, the coping mechanism, and that will help them calm down before the negative behavior or overstimulation, the meltdown, might take place. Um, Also, something that you can do is, if your child is really sensitive to textures of clothing, of shoes, anything like that, really pay attention to when you go shopping for clothing. It might not just be the Elsa or the Spider-Man on the clothing that makes it intriguing for them to take that piece of clothing, but it might be the texture of the material that's going to make them feel comfortable with the clothing. So that is really something that I would recommend, is to look at the texture of the clothing, look at the material, and see how they react towards that. Another one is to set up a quiet zone, or as we call it, a calm down corner. It's very important for your child to know that this is not a method of punishment, but it is to help them. So once again, as soon as you see that your child is getting overstimulated, they are kind of losing control over their emotions, you take them to the calm down corner and tell them, listen, don't you just want to take some time for yourself? I can see that this is getting a little bit too much for you. It seems like you're going to go into a different zone. So if you listen to our first podcast, you'll know the blue, red, green, and yellow zones. So acknowledge how they are feeling, so that they know you see them and you don't just think it's them overreacting or acting out. And in this, the calm down corner, you can then have something like blankets, pillows, once again, sensory toys, something like that, just for them to calm down, take their head off of the emotions, over feeling overwhelmed, and then basically you'll have your child back. So Linda, I want to ask you now for just a couple of words of encouragement for everyone listening or watching today. what would you tell a parent with more than one child, or a teacher working with loads of children that might be struggling with this?
Okay, honestly, one size doesn't fit all. So what works for one child may overstimulate the other. So what we need to do is observe, adapt, and be very patient. So parents must really know that it is not their fault. This is very complex and you are doing your best. So seek help if needed, and there are strategies and they do work.
Thank you so much. I think something that I think we mentioned earlier is that behavior is communication for your child. When your child shows behavior, it's their way of communicating. Remember that we already have years of training of, living on this earth, going through difficult situations, etc. The children, they do not. They need our guidance. So really, like Linda said, observe their behavior and when it takes place. Sensory challenges are real, okay? And children aren't just acting out. I know, because I struggle with sensory challenges of my own. I'm very auditory sensitive, and I am very picky with textures inside my mouth. So I also struggle with it. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. And thank you for, just being here with us, listening to one of our other podcasts. And I hope it was really informative. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, your input, all the information that you gave us. And it was such a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. See you next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.